I didn't scream when I saw him. That's the first thing I need to clarify, because I imagine most people think of hell as a place of immediate chaos and deafening noise. For me, the beginning wasn't like that. The beginning was polished, it was polite, it was terribly civilized. The one whom many call the enemy, the adversary, or by the name I unnecessarily avoid pronouncing, did not present himself to me with horns or flaming pitchforks. He presented himself with arguments, and that's precisely what makes me tremble, even now, sitting on this safe balcony in Gramado, with the morning sun trying to warm bones that never again lost the cold of that night. My name is Maria Helena, I am 76 years old. For 4 decades, I was a judge. My life was built on logic, cold law, and the absolute certainty that I held the truth in my hands. I was known in the courts of Rio Grande do Sul for my severity. There was no room for emotions in my office. Sentences were mathematical calculations of guilt and punishment. I looked at the defendants and didn't see broken human beings. I saw problems to be filed away. When I retired, I maintained that posture, to avoid appearing arrogant in the eyes of local society. I adopted a humble hobby. I became a seamstress of embroidery for the city's church. It may seem a contradiction, a retired judge bent over linen and needle, but it was part of my disguise. I embroidered altar cloths, robes for choirs, everything with a morbid perfectionism. People said I was a saint. They said that drive, Maria Helena, besides being just, was pious. I accepted the compliments with a restrained smile, but inside I fed on that admiration. I didn't embroider for God, I embroidered so that people would admire my skill. I didn't attend church services to seek salvation or repentance. I went to maintain my status as a moral pillar of the community. That July night, the fog covered the Surigauca Mountains like a dirty blanket. My house, an old building of stone and fine wood, was silent. I was in the library, my favorite room, surrounded by thousands of law books that I considered my true friends. On the oak table, the white linen fabric was stretched out. I was finishing a complex embroidery with gold threads. I clearly remember the thought that crossed my mind minutes before everything happened. I thought about how ridiculous the Christian testimonies I occasionally heard were. I had the intellectual habit of watching videos on the internet about testimonies from hell or accounts of near-death experiences, but not to learn. I watched to analyze the logical flaws. I listened to simple people, often uneducated, talking about fire, tunnels of light, and encounters with Jesus Christ, and I diagnosed that as mass hysteria. For me, eternal life was a philosophical concept, not a geographical reality. I believed in a moral order, and since I had never killed, stolen, or committed adultery, I was convinced that if there was a heaven, my place in the front row was guaranteed by merit. I didn't need grace, I had a resume. That's when the needle pricked my finger. It wasn't an ordinary prick, it was a sharp pain that ran up my left arm, like a glowing barbed wire. I let go of the fabric, tried to put my hand to my chest, but my body wouldn't obey. The teacup on the table fell, staining the white linen and the gold thread with a dark liquid. I tried to call my housekeeper who slept in the back annex, but my throat was closed. I couldn't breathe. There was no time for the film of my life to play before my eyes. There was only the clinical and terrifying realization that my heart, that organ I had always controlled with diet and discipline, had stopped. I fell onto the Persian rug. The smell of old dust from the books was the last thing I felt in the physical world. Darkness came quickly, but it wasn't like sleeping, it was like being switched off. I expected nothing. As a woman of science and law, I was prepared for non-existence, or at best, I expected that comforting tunnel of light that so many evangelical testimonies describe, where relatives come to fetch us with smiles. I expected to see my deceased husband or perhaps my parents, but I saw no light. When I opened my eyes again, I was still sitting, but I wasn't in my library. I was in a high-back chair, made of material that felt like obsidian, cold and smooth. The environment around me had the architecture of a courtroom, but a courtroom that no human architect could design. The walls were too high, disappearing into an upper darkness, where there was no ceiling. The floor was of black marble so polished that it reflected not my face, but shadows that moved beneath the surface, as if something alive were swimming inside the stone. I stood up, automatically adjusting my blazer. My first reaction wasn't fear, it was indignation. The judge within me took over. I thought it was some kind of cosmic administrative error or perhaps a dream induced by a lack of oxygen in the brain. I looked at my hands. They seemed real, solid, but had a grayish tone like old paper. "Where am I?" I asked. My voice came out, but didn't echo. The sound fell dead at my feet, absorbed by the voracious floor. I started walking. The place was a vast corridor, flanked by immense columns. The silence was absolute, but it wasn't a silence of peace, it was a tense silence, like the exact moment before a guilty verdict is read, stretched into eternity. I felt watched, but I didn't see anyone. The temperature was frigid, a cold that didn't make you shiver, but that ached in your teeth and joints. It was the cold of absolute solitude. I walked for what seemed like hours, although I knew instinctively that time that didn't work like on my wristwatch. I tried to maintain rationality. I told myself, "Maria Helena, analyze the evidence. You had a heart attack. This must be a mental construct of your dying cortex. Stay calm. Logic will get you out of here." That's when I saw the other people. They were standing by the walls at regular intervals, like living statues. They were men and women dressed with extreme elegance. I saw men in suits and ties, women in evening gowns, some even in robes that resembled magistrates' togas or clerical clothing. I felt a momentary relief. I thought, I see I'm among my own kind, good people, classy people. I quickened my pace towards a tall man wearing an impeccable Italian cut suit. He was standing, looking ahead with an erect posture. "Sir," I called, regaining my authority as a magistrate, "could you tell me where we are? There must have been some misunderstanding. I am Drive, Maria Helena, a retired judge. I shouldn't be waiting in this hallway." The man slowly turned his face toward me, and it was at that moment that my logic began to crack. His face was normal, except for his eyes, where the eyeballs, the iris, the pupil, should have been. There was only skin. The eyelids were stitched shut, and I recognized the stitch. It wasn't a crude stitch, it was a fine, delicate embroidery, made with gold thread, the same type of stitch I used on the church towels, the same technical perfectionism that I valued so much. I took a step back. The air caught in my throat. He had no eyes, but he saw me. I felt that he saw me. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out, only a dry sigh, like wind passing through dead leaves. He smiled, a sad and resigned smile, and pointed with his well-cared for hand to the end of the hallway. I looked at the others. Along the wall, a woman with pearls around her neck turned, her eyes sewn shut. A young man in doctor's clothes, eyes sewn shut, all of them blinded by a beautiful golden thread. The beauty of the stitching was the horror of the vision. It was the aesthetics of torment. My heart, which no longer beat physically, raced in spirit. This couldn't be a hallucination. It was too specific, too cruel. I looked to the end of the corridor, where the man had pointed. There was a double door, gigantic, of dark, solid wood, with bronze doorknobs that shone with their own oily light. Above the door there was no sign, no warning to abandon hope, only oppressive silence. I knew I should run to the other side, flee from those blind figures. Another invisible force pulled me towards that door. It was like gravity. My whole life I had walked towards that door without knowing it. Every sentence I passed without mercy, every stitch I sewed with vanity, every time I mocked a powerful testimony about God's grace, all of that built the path to this place. I approached the door. I didn't want to open it, but my hands moved on their own. The morbid curiosity, the same one that made me analyze the mistakes of others, now compelled me to see who owned that bizarre court. I needed to know who the ultimate authority was so I could argue my case. I was sure that if I could speak to the judge of that place, I would explain the misunderstanding, I would show my background, I would prove that I was a good woman. I placed my hand on the cold doorknob. The metal seemed to vibrate under my fingers, as if there were a low-voltage electric current running through the door. I turned it. The door opened without a sound. sliding on perfectly lubricated hinges. The air that came out of there didn't smell of sulfur, it smelled of old books, varnished wood, and an expensive, subtle, and cloying men's perfume. I took the first step into the office, and at that moment Judge Maria Helena died for the second time. The first death was of the body, the second death was that of my arrogance, because what I saw inside wasn't a monster waiting to devour me, it was something much worse. It was someone who seemed to be waiting for me with the patience of someone who knows that in the end all the cases end up on his desk. I went in, and the door closed behind me with a sound, the final judgment of a sentence that had become res judicata. I was imprisoned, and I didn't even know it yet, but the real hearing was just beginning. There would be no lawyers, there would be no appeal, and the judge in front of me wasn't really interested, only in my voluntary conviction. There was no fire, no smell of sulfur, no red demons with tridents laughing in dark corners. If I had found that, perhaps, ironically, I would have felt safer. The grotesque is easy to identify as an enemy, the monstrous repels us instantly, but what I found in that room was something far more dangerous. I found familiarity. The office I entered was a magnificent reproduction, almost obscene in its perfection, of the largest law libraries I had ever seen in Europe. The ceiling was very high, disappearing into a velvety darkness high above. The shelves, made of a black wood that seemed to absorb the light, were packed with leather-bound books. There were millions of volumes, golden spines, silver, red. There was a spiral staircase that climbed between the shelves, and the floor was covered with oriental carpets so thick that they completely muffled the sound of my footsteps. The lighting was indirect, coming from bronze sconces that emitted a white, clinical, cold light. It was the light of a morgue disguised as a reading lamp. That light didn't warm, it revealed, it removed the shadows, but it didn't bring comfort. In the center of the room was an immense table, polished like a mirror, without a single paper out of place. Behind it, a high-backed chair turned its back to me. I stopped in the middle of the carpet. My non-existent breath seemed trapped in the throat of my soul. I, Drive, Maria Helena, who never bowed my head to a prosecutor, lawyer, or governor, felt my knees tremble, not from physical fear, but from an involuntary reverence. The atmosphere exuded power. Authority was the kind of place where destinies were sealed with a fountain pen, not a whip. "Come in, Your Excellency." The voice came from the chair. It was a male voice, baritone, smooth, like tearing silk. There was no hoarseness, no guttural sound that horror movies sell us. It was an educated, cultured voice, with perfect delivery, a voice that could very well be reciting poetry or pronouncing a death sentence with the same ease. The chair slowly turned. I braced myself for the horror. I closed my eyes for a millisecond, expecting to see a skull, a deformed face, blood, but when I opened my eyes, what I saw completely disarmed me. The man sitting there was beautiful. It wasn't a common, human beauty, the kind we see in magazines or on television. It was an architectural beauty. His face seemed to have been sculpted from pale marble by an artist obsessed with perfection. High cheekbones, a straight nose, thin lips curved in a half-smile that denoted age-old intelligence. He was wearing an impeccably tailored black suit, with a white shirt so white it hurt to look at and a dark grey silk tie. If I saw him on the street, I would think he was a diplomat or perhaps the CEO of a multinational corporation, but there was something in his eyes. His eyes weren't human. They were too deep, a blue so pale they seemed white, like ancient ice, and they didn't blink. They fixed on me with a predatory intensity, more disguised as polite interest. He stood up. He was tall, slender, and made an elegant gesture with his hand, indicating the empty chair in front of the table. "Please, Drive, Maria Helena, sit down. We were expecting you." The hearing couldn't begin without our guest of honor. I walked to the chair. My steps were automatic. I sat down, crossing my legs and adjusting my skirt, a reflection of decades of etiquette. I placed my hands on my lap, trying to hide that they were trembling. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice came out firmer than I expected. The judge in me refused to surrender without inquiry. "And where are we? Is this some kind of superior court?" He laughed, a short, dry laugh. like the snap of a dry branch. Superior Court, I like the nomenclature. Yes, in a way. He leaned back, interlacing his long, pale fingers. I have many names. Drive, Maria Helena. Some call me the accuser, others call me the adversary. He pointed a finger at the dark ceiling with subtle disdain and said, the one up there in heaven prefer to call me the rebel, but here, I'm merely the host, and you are in my home in the kingdom of hell. Ice ran down my spine. My judge's mind rejected the conclusion. This can't be hell, I argued using my in-turn correcting tone. Hell is for murderers, for rapists, for dirty people. I am a magistrate. I have dedicated 40 years to law and order. I punished evil. I was a church seamstress. I embroidered robes. There must be a mistake in the paperwork. His smile widened, revealing perfectly white teeth. The paperwork. He reached out and touched a thick, black-covered book on the table. We are very rigorous with the paperwork here. Drive, Maria Helena. More rigorous than your court of justice in Rio Grande do Sul ever dreamed of being. We don't miss deadlines. We don't lose evidence. He opened the book. There was no paper inside. The pages seemed made of solid smoke. He ran his finger along an invisible line. Maria Helena, born in 1948, an exemplary judge, feared, respected. He looked me in the eyes and, above all, proud. The word hung in the air like a sentence. Being proud of your work is not a crime, I retorted, feeling the indignation growing. It's a virtue, it's a sign of excellence. Excellence, he savored the word. I love that word. You know, Doctor, you are one of my favorites. He stood up and began to walk around the table, approaching me. The scent of his cologne grew stronger, a sweet, cloying aroma of old lilies. I get a lot of murderers here, it's true, brutal people, people who kill for money, for anger. They are boring, predictable. They arrive here screaming, crying, asking for forgiveness too late. It's a vulgar racket. He stopped behind my chair. I felt the cold emanating from his body, crossing the backrest and chilling my back. He leaned his head close to my ear. But you, Mom, you are a delicacy, a woman of the law, a woman who embroidered for God while secretly despising his children, a woman who listened to powerful testimonies of transformation and wrinkled her nose, calling it fanaticism. I wanted to turn around, I wanted to scream, but I was paralyzed. He continued whispering, and his voice seemed to go straight into my brain, without passing through my ears. I don't need fire to torment someone like you, Dr. Maria Helena. The fire is for the common people, for the elite. For the elite, we have the truth. He returned to the front of the table and leaned on it, crossing his arms. You think you're here by mistake. You think you're good. I am good, I exploded. The sentence came out as a strangled scream. I never stole. I gave alms. I kept society safe by arresting criminals. What more did that God want from me? The mention of God caused the room's light to flicker, dimming for a second. The expression of the man who was the devil in the suit hardened, momentarily losing his politeness. Pure hatred flashed in that icy blue, but he contained it, quickly, returning to the mask of ironic host. What did he want? The devil laughed, shaking his head as if I were a foolish child, and said, he wanted your heart, Maria Helena, but that place was already occupied. Wasn't it? It was occupied by you yourself. He walked to one of the shelves and pulled out a book. The cover was embroidered. I recognized it immediately. It was my embroidery. The white linen with gold threads that I was making when I died. Beautiful work, he said, admiring the stitches. Perfect, symmetrical, flawless, just like your life, isn't it? Without visible flaws. He threw the book on the table with a dull thud. Do you know why you're here, Doctor? It's not for the crimes you committed, it's for the justice you thought you had. I looked at the embroidery. Suddenly, the gold threads began to darken. What was beautiful began to look like a dirty spider web. I am a collector of refined souls, he continued, his voice now taking on a hypnotic tone, and my greatest pleasure is not dragging the filthy sinner into the abyss. My greatest pleasure is convincing the righteous that they don't need a savior. It's about convincing the kind woman that her kindness is enough. He leaned over the table, his face inches from mine. I could see the pores of his perfect skin, There was no life there. There was only a superb imitation of life. You've spent your life judging, now I'm going to let you judge yourself. But first he paused thematically, his eyes fixed on mine. I want to show you my favorite trick. The trick that brought you and so many other upstanding citizens to my marble waiting room. I felt my spirit crumble. Logic didn't work there. My legal arguments were dust. The shield was being dismantled, phrase by phrase, by that elegant being. Logic didn't work there. My legal arguments were dust. The certainty of my kindness, which had always been my shield, was being dismantled, phrase by phrase, by that elegant being. I wasn't being physically tortured, but I felt a sharp pain in my chest, an anguish that grew like an accelerated cancer, the realization that I could be wrong, that my entire life of moral rectitude could have been a lie constructed to stroke my ego. Prepare yourself, Your Excellency, he whispered, the hearing is about to begin. The devil sat down again with an irritating calmness, crossing his legs and smoothing the impeccable crease of his trousers. The room accelerated cancer, the realization that I might be wrong, that my entire life of moral rectitude, it could have been a lie constructed to stroke my ego. Get ready, Your Excellency, he whispered, the hearing is about to begin, and R is the lady. If this story is speaking to you, if something inside your heart is stirring, stay with me and take a moment to subscribe to the channel. This isn't just a video, this is an encounter with God. He sat down again with an irritating calm, crossing his legs and smoothing the impeccable crease of his trousers. The room seemed to have shrunk, as if the bookshelves were leaning forward to listen to our conversation. The silence was so dense that I could hear the sound of the fabric of my own clothes brushing against the chair with every nervous movement I made. I, who had spent my life intimidating unprepared lawyers with just a look, now felt like an intern on her first day of work, about to make a fatal mistake. Doctor, he began, twirling a ring on his pinky finger, let's talk about jurisprudence. You understand laws, right? Human laws, penal codes, the Constitution. You all love that stuff up there, paper, ink, and stamps to try to control human nature. Is law the basis of civilization? I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Without law, we would be animals. Exactly, animals, he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. But here, Maria Helena, the law is different. Do you think sin is a list of forbidden things? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, and since you didn't do any of those gross things, you feel safe, you feel wronged for being here. He stood up again and walked to a side wall, where there was an object covered by a black velvet cloth. I have a gift for you, Madame, expert evidence, if you prefer to use your terms. With a theatrical movement, he pulled back the cloth. Beneath it was a mirror, but not an ordinary mirror. The frame was made of polished bones interwoven with gold, a mixture of death and wealth that made me nauseous. The surface was not glass, it seemed made of liquid mercury, a living silver that rippled gently, like a lake disturbed by an invisible breeze. Come closer, Your Excellency, he ordered. It was not an invitation. The authority in his voice made me rise against my will. I walked to the mirror. I expected to see my reflection, my grey hair tied in a severe bun, my great eye, my expression lines. But what I saw made me take a step back in horror. The image in the mirror didn't show my body, it showed scenes from my life, projected with painful clarity, in high definition, but with a strange, reddish color. What is this? I whispered. This is the mirror of intention, he explained, stopping right behind me. I could feel the cold emanating from him. The human mirror reflects light, this one reflects the heart. It ignores the external action and shows only what was happening inside your soul at the moment of the action. Observe. In the mirror, I saw a scene from 5 years ago. I was in church, in the front pew. As always, I was handing a thick tithe envelope to the treasurer. In real life, I remember smiling humbly and saying for God's work, but in the mirror the image was different. I saw myself, but I also saw a dark shadow coming from my chest, a smoke that formed words around my head. As I handed over the money, the caption in my soul read, "See how generous I am, See how much better I am than the woman next to me, who only gave a few coins. I support this place, they owe me respect." The scene changed. Now I was in my judge's chambers, sentencing a young man for robbery. I was reading the sentence in a harsh voice, talking about the need to cleanse society. In the mirror, however, my inner image was laughing. I felt a sadistic pleasure. I didn't want justice, I wanted power. I felt like a goddess deciding the fate of a mortal. The black smoke around me screamed, "I am the law, I am untouchable. This trash deserves to suffer so that I can feel clean." I recoiled from the mirror, trembling. "That's a lie!" I screamed, turning to him. "That's distortion, I've always acted righteously." He laughed, a genuine laugh now, as if he'd just heard the world's greatest joke. Righteousness. He walked back to the table and sat on the edge, swinging his legs casually. "Maria Helena, you still don't understand. My greatest trick isn't making people commit crimes. That's easy, that's for amateurs. Any third-rate demon can make a man drink himself to death or beat his wife. That's vulgar, I'm not interested." He leaned forward, his blue eyes piercing my soul. "My greatest trick, my masterpiece, is taking a decent person, a moral person, a religious person, and making them believe they're good enough. It's filling their heart with pride disguised as virtue." I leaned against the bookshelf, feeling the smell of old leather suffocate me. My defenses were crumbling. "I'm not evil," I murmured, but the conviction had vanished. "You're not evil like a murderer," he agreed. "You're evil like the fallen angel." "Do you know why I was cast out from up there? I didn't kill anyone, I didn't steal anything, I just looked at myself and thought I was splendid. I fell in love with my own light, and that's exactly what you did." He stood up and began walking around me, circling like a shark in calm waters. "You despised sinners. When I heard a testimony from someone who had been rescued from drugs or crime, you thought, good for him, but I never needed to stoop so low. You thought the cross was for the weak, for the broken. You used religion as a badge of honor, not as a hospital for the soul." Every word of his was a hammer blow. He was describing thoughts I had never spoken aloud, secrets I kept in the darkest parts of my mind. "Maria Helena's pride is sin, more refined. She doesn't get her hands dirty, she wears a gown, she wears clothes of on Sundays, she does charity work, she embroiders altar cloths with gold thread while judging the pastor, the choir, the faithful." He stopped in front of me and held my chin with his cold hand, forcing me to look at him. "You didn't need Jesus, you had yourself, and whoever has themselves already has their God, a small, weak, and mortal God." He released my face with a light push. "Hell is full of good people, Maria Helena, it's packed with honest people who paid their taxes, who never betrayed their spouse, who gave alms, people who looked to heaven and said, 'I did my part, God owes me salvation.' Nobody owes you anything. Salvation is an undeserved favor, and you, in your arrogance, rejected the favor because you thought you had credit." I fell to my knees, not because I wanted to surrender, but because my legs could no longer bear the weight of that truth. The mirror continued to show scenes. Now it showed me passing by a homeless person. I didn't kick him, I just ignored him, feeling a deep disgust, a certainty that he was there out of laziness and I was in my imported garb by merit. The mirror showed the coldness of my heart, a block of ice that I called dignity. "You deceived me," I whispered to the Persian carpet floor. "I didn't deceive you," he corrected, returning to his leather chair. "I only agreed with you. You said you were fair and I applauded. You said you didn't need to regret anything and I whispered, 'Exactly, you are perfect.' I am just the mirror of your vanity. You built your own cell, brick by brick of self-help." I just locked the door. He opened a drawer in the desk and took out a heavy metal stamp. "And now for the verdict. You like verdicts, don't you? You've spent your life giving them." He picked up the black-covered book again. "The defendant, Maria Helena, the accusation, self-idolatry, the sentence." He stopped, holding the stamp in midair. His smile vanished. The mask of politeness fell for a second, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath. "The sentence is to be left with exactly what you loved most in life, yourself, forever, without God, without light, just you and your pride in a place where no one will applaud your righteousness." He slammed the stamp on the table. The sound was like thunder. The marble floor beneath the carpets began to vibrate, the bookshelves began to tremble, and the books began to fall, opening onto the floor. But they weren't books. Worms began to emerge from within them. The illusion was beginning to shatter. The elegant office was about to reveal its true nature. The host cut from the charade, and I, the judge, was about to see the true face of the prison I helped build. "Welcome to reality, Your Honor," he said as the fine wood walls began to drip like melted wax. The conversation ended. "Payment begins now." The sound of the wood installing became unbearable, not because of the volume, but because of the texture of the noise. It was as if bones were breaking inside the walls. The books, those thousands of volumes that represented human knowledge, the law, the order I so cherished, began to liquefy. The letters dripped from the pages like fresh ink in the rain, transforming into a black, viscous paste that dripped onto the Persian carpet, and then I realized with horror that the paste, it wasn't ink, it was tiny, black, frenzied worms devouring the very knowledge that sustained it. I recoiled, trying not to step on the rot spreading across the floor. The man in the suit, however, remained motionless. The filth didn't touch him. The decaying environment seemed like a theatrical set being dismantled around him. He watched me with that predatory calm, like a scientist who has just inoculated a virus and waits for the symptoms to appear. "You seem disturbed, Your Excellency," he said. His voice now echoed inside my skull, ignoring my ears. "Reality is often disappointing for those who have lived by appearances. You liked the law because it was clean, black and white. But sin, sin is organic, it rots." He walked over the worms without sinking. He stopped a meter from me. The scent of expensive perfume had vanished, replaced by a sweetish odor of funeral flowers that had been in the vase for too long, mixed with rotten meat. "I promised to show you my trick," he continued, twirling the ring of symbols. "You've seen the mirror, you've seen your intention, but you still haven't understood the genius of the trap. You still think this is an injustice." He pointed to the wall where the front door had once been. The wood melted completely, revealing not the marble corridor, but a breathtaking panoramic view. Before us stretched a vast, grey plain, without a horizon, and on it was a multitude. They weren't monsters. They were ordinary people, thousands, millions of them, and they all walked in single file with their heads held high, their chests puffed out, holding Bibles, crucifixes, diplomas, car keys, property deeds. They walked with dignity. They walked with the absolute certainty of those who know where they are going, but they were walking straight into an abyss. The edge of the plain ended abruptly in endless darkness and they fell one by one, without screaming, without realizing that the ground had ended until the moment gravity pulled them down. "Look," he whispered in my ear, "see who they are." I squinted. I saw a man wearing a cassock. I saw a lady who looked like a loving grandmother. I saw businessmen I knew to be big charitable donors, and they all had something in common. They weren't looking at the path, they were looking at mirrors they held in their hands. They walked admiring their own holiness, their own righteousness. "This is the secret," said the devil, his voice distilling pure poison. "I don't need to drag anyone to hell, that's too much work. I have to fight against conscience, against angels, against mother's prayers. It's tiring." He turned to me and his face seemed to stretch, as if the skin was becoming too small for what was underneath. "It's much more efficient to convince the human that he is already saved by his own merit. When I make a man believe that he is good, that he is a good citizen, that he has never killed anyone, I don't need to do anything else." He himself walks towards the abyss, guided by pride. Pride is the only compass that always points downwards. Maria Helena. I looked at that crowd blinded by its own light. I felt a tightness in my chest, a pain of recognition. I was in that line. I spent my whole life in that line. I held my judge's robe and my church embroidery as if they were diplomatic passports to heaven. "And you know what the best part is?" he asked, laughing softly. "Repentance is the only key that opens the exit door, but a good man doesn't repent. What would he repent of? Being honest, being hardworking, He doesn't see the dirt in his heart, so he doesn't ask for cleansing. He dies clean on the outside and rotten on the inside. He approached me again. This time he extended his hand. In his palm was a small, shiny object, a sewing needle and a spool of golden thread. "Do you recognize this, ma'am?" he asked. "They're mine," I replied, my voice trembling. "I used to use them to stitch the altar cloths." He corrected, closing his fingers over the spark. "You used them to blind yourself. Every perfect stitch you made, thinking about how others would praise you, was a stitch on your own eyelid. You stitched your spiritual eyes stitch by stitch, mass by mass, praise by praise." He threw the needle on the floor over the worms. The metal hissed as if it were incandescent. "Pride is the strongest thread in the universe, Doctor. Not even steel can withstand as much weight as the ego of a religious woman who thinks she's better than others. I saw you in church looking at the prostitutes, at the drug addicts who came in seeking help. You felt disgust. You moved away so as not to soil your clothes, man." The image of the church came to my mind with brutal clarity. I remembered a specific Sunday. A tattooed boy, smelling of? He smoked a cigarette, sat on the bench behind me. I remembered pulling my purse forward and brushing my skirt uncomfortably. I didn't pray for him, I prayed thanking God for not being like him. "That boy," said the host, reading my mind, "is in heaven now." He knew he was dirty. He asked for water. He cried out to Jesus and he was washed. "But you, Mom, you were already too clean, weren't you? You didn't need a bath." The irony was acidic, corrosive. I understood with a chilling dread that the murderer on the cross, next to Christ, had a better chance than I, the respectable judge, because he knew he deserved the cross. I thought I deserved the throne. My greatest trick. "Maria Helena, I made you love your own goodness more than God. I exchanged the Creator for the creature on the altar of your heart, and you didn't even notice. You worshipped yourself every Sunday morning, singing hymns with your lips and glorifying yourself with your mind. The ground beneath my feet gave way a little more, the black mud rose to my ankles. I tried to move, but I was stuck. And now?" he said, his voice completely losing its human politeness, becoming a subterranean growl. "You'll see what happens when the illusion of goodness is ripped away. You'll see what remains of a soul that never truly bowed. You wanted justice? Justice demands the naked truth." His elegant suit began to tear at the back. The office had completely disappeared. We were in a grey vacuum, illuminated only by the sickly light emanating from his skin. "Prepare to be undone, Your Excellency, because here your diploma is worthless. Here your reputation is dust. Here only the truth exists that you tried to hide under the carpets and embroidery." He pointed his finger at me and for the first time I felt the heat. It wasn't the heat of a fireplace, it was the heat of an oven, a heat that came from within the earth, rising up my legs trapped in the mud. "The trial is over," he decreed. "The execution of the sentence begins now." I tried to scream, but the air had vanished from my lungs. I was alone with him and his mask was about to fall completely. The great deceiver had removed the gentleman's disguise. What was before me now was pure, ancient, and insatiable hunger, and I was the main course. The transformation wasn't slow. It happened with the violence of shattering glass. The elegant man who, minutes before, had spoken with the smooth cadence of a diplomat, simply ceased to exist. The silk of his expensive suit didn't tear, it rotted instantly, falling into great tatters that dissolved in the stale air. His marble skin, so pale and perfect, began to bubble like burning plastic, darkening, cracking, revealing a texture of old, charred leather underneath. I wanted to close my eyes, but terror has a cruel property, he keeps his eyelids forcibly open. I was forced to see, where before there was a face of classical beauty, now there was only a mass of concentrated hatred. The human features melted away, the straight nose sank, the mouth tore open in a grimace that went from ear to ear, full of teeth that looked like shards of dirty glass, but the worst were the eyes, that icy, intelligent blue vanished. In its place appeared two wells of absolute darkness, without white, without shine, black holes that sucked away any hope that still remained in the environment. "Do you think I'm handsome now, Maria Helena?" The voice no longer came from one throat, it came from all directions, a hoarse thunder sound mixed with the hissing of thousands of insects. "Do you think my conversation is pleasant? You liked my politeness because it reflected yours. You liked the shell. Now look at the core." The office completely disappeared. The bookshelves, the mahogany desk, the Persian rugs, everything dissolved into an oily smoke. The floor where I knelt gave way completely. I was no longer in a room. I was in a swamp, but it wasn't mud and water. It was a warm, pulsating substance that smelled of coagulated blood and sewage. I tried to stand, but my legs were trapped up to my knees. I looked at my body, my judge's Tyler, that symbol of my authority. The clothes I wore to command respect in court began to disintegrate. The fine fabric turned to rags, then dust, leaving me exposed. Not naked like a newborn child, but naked like someone who has been robbed, violated in their dignity. Shame burned me more than any fire. I, the Totora Maria Helena, exposed in that filth, without protection. From my robe, without the protection of my titles, "Where is your honor, Judge?" He mocked, circling me. He was now a giant shadow, a silhouette of torment that blocked any view beyond him. "Where is your gavel? Where is your sentence?" I tried to cover my body with my arms, crying without tears. The dry sound of my crying was pathetic. "I am a good woman," I shouted, but the phrase came out choked, ridiculous. "I did charity, I embroidered to be the church." "Ah, the embroidery." The shadow stopped and leaned over me. The heat emanating from it was now unbearable, a breath of an industrial oven. "Let's see your embroidery." He snapped his fingers, a sound that echoed like a bone breaking. Suddenly, the mud around me began to move. I felt thin, sharp things brushing against my legs, climbing up my thighs, squeezing my arms. I looked down and screamed. They weren't worms, they were threads, thousands, millions of threads of gold and linen, the same threads I used in my altar cloths. The same threads I used to buy at the best haberdashery shops in Gramado. They sprouted from that rotten ground like tiny snakes. They shone with a golden light, but it was a sick, malignant glow. The threads began to wrap around me. They weren't soft, they were like barbed wire. Each turn cut my spiritual skin, burned like acid. They climbed up my torso, tightening, suffocating. "You liked to sew, didn't you?" His voice was pure mockery. "You liked to see the perfect stitches. You were proud of how straight your line was while the lives of others were crooked. Well, here is your harvest, Maria Helena, your work." I understood with horror what was happening. This wasn't a random punishment. This was the materialization of my life. Those threads were my good works. They were the hours I spent embroidering to be praised, while my heart was full of contempt for others. They were the arms I gave hoping for recognition. They were the harsh verdicts I delivered without mercy. Everything I did out of vanity now came back to bind me. A golden thread climbed up my neck and began to sew my mouth shut. I felt the invisible needle pierce my lower lip and then my upper lip. The pain was indescribable, sharp, electric. I tried to scream, but the thread pulled, closing my mouth with brutal force. "Silence!" roared the creature. "You've talked too much your whole life, you've judged too much. Your mouth pronounced moral death sentences for so many and now it must be closed with the gold of your hypocrisy." Other threads climbed up to my eyes. I remembered the condemned in the marble corridor, their eyes sewn shut. Panic exploded inside me. I would be one of them. I would be just another blind statue in that eternal corridor, trapped inside my own mind, forever remembering how good I was. I struggled in the mud. The mud entered my nose, a taste of iron and ash. The creature laughed, a sound that made the very air vibrate. "Look!" he shouted. "Look at the great judge. Look how she struggles in her own justice. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it poetic? The woman who thought she didn't need blood to be saved is now drowning in her own righteousness." He grabbed a handful of those wires that bound me and pulled hard. I was dragged through the mud, my face scraping the filthy ground. The physical pain was immense, but the spiritual pain was devastating. The certainty that I was wrong. The absolute, undeniable certainty that every moment of pride in my life was a brick in this prison. I saw flashes of my existence. I saw the face of my husband whom I treated coldly. I saw the face of my maid to whom I never gave a sincere good morning, only orders. I saw the defendants I condemned, men who cried and I told them to be quiet. I saw the naked truth. I was a monster. Not a monster with claws, but a monster of ice, a monster of indifference. And the creature knew it. He fed on it. "No one will hear you here," he whispered, bringing that deformed face close to my ear. His heat burned my skin. "God doesn't listen to the prayers of those who think they are God. You wanted to be sovereign in your little world. Congratulations, Your Excellency. Here is your kingdom, a kingdom of mud, wires and silence." The golden wire was about to pierce my left eyelid. I saw the sharp tip gleaming with malice, descending toward my eye. Despair took over everything. There was no logic. Now hey vile, now hey vire cursoda apilas our Supremo Tribunal Federal. The only law there was pain and eternity. I was lost, I was condemned, and worst of all, the sentence was just. I deserved it. I deserved every inch of that cutting wire. It was in that moment of total defeat, when the dignity of Judge Maria Helena was finally crushed, that something changed inside me. It wasn't a rational thought, it was a rupture. The stone wall that had surrounded my heart for 76 years cracked. For the first time, I didn't feel superior to anyone. I felt smaller than the worm crawling in the mud. I felt dirty. I felt needy. The needle touched my eyelid, and in that second, at the bottom of the well of my misery, an old memory surfaced. It wasn't a law, it wasn't an article of the penal code, it was the voice of the defendant I despised, that simple man, the thief I condemned, who cried in court and said, "But, doctor, he forgives, he forgives." I always thought he was talking about a lawyer. Now I knew who he was talking about. Me. I couldn't open my mouth, sewn shut by the thread of my vanity, but the scream doesn't need a mouth when the soul is tearing apart. The scream formed in the center of my being, a volcanic pressure that ignored the mud, ignored the demon, ignored the whole of hell. I needed to call upon him, not as judge, but as defendant, as the worst of sinners. The creature perceived it. The shadow recoiled a millimeter, as if it had smelled a scent that disgusted it more than false holiness, the scent of true repentance. "No, you!" he screamed, and his voice trembled. "You are mine. You are proud. You don't lower yourself. Maintain your dignity, woman. Die like a queen." But I didn't want to be a queen. I wanted to be saved. The physical pain was excruciating, but the mental clarity that came with it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. With my mouth sewn shut by the thread of my own vanity and my eyes about to be blinded by my arrogance, time seemed to stop. Not time chronological, but the time of the soul. In that abyss of mud and shame, Dr. Maria Helena, the implacable judge, truly died, and what remained there, trembling and dirty, had no title, no position, and no merit. The demon, that shapeless shadow that once wore a silk suit, perceived the change. He stopped laughing. The air around me grew heavy, dense as molten lead. He knew that as long as I tried to defend myself, as long as I tried to argue that I was a good person, I belonged to him. Self-righteousness is the currency of hell, but the moment the soul breaks, the moment we admit we are worthless, is the moment the game changes. He lowered himself, bringing that nightmarish face close to mine. "Don't do it," he hissed. His voice was no longer authoritative, it was desperate. "Don't humiliate yourself. You are a queen. You're a woman of law, maintain your posture. Don't lower him to the level of the rabble who cry and beg for mercy." He tried to appeal to my pride, he tried to resurrect the haughty judge who lived within me. But that judge was dead. I looked at him through the mud that covered my eyelashes and didn't see an adversary, I saw a jailer who was losing the key. My mind was violently pulled back, not to my library, nor to the church where I embroidered. I was taken back to a rainy Tuesday, 10 years before, in the criminal court of Porto Alegre. I was sitting in my elevated chair, wearing the black robe I loved so much. In front of me, in the defendant's dock, his name was Antonio. He was a nobody, a poor man, his hands calloused from manual labor, arrested for a petty theft driven by hunger and contempt of court. He had no lawyer, only a tired public defender who barely looked at him. I remember the musty smell of the courtroom that day. I remember the sound of the rain hitting the high windows, and I remember with a clarity that now cuts my heart to the core, Antonio's face. He was crying. It wasn't a theatrical cry, it was an ugly cry, a runny nose. The cry of a man who had reached the end of the line. When I read the sentence, condemning him with exemplary severity to set an example for society, he didn't curse. He didn't threaten. He looked at me with those red, swollen eyes and said something that I ordered to be crossed out of the record. He said, "Your Honor, I was wrong. I am crooked, but Jesus straightens what is crooked. You can imprison me, but he will set me free inside." At the time, I banged the gavel forcefully, ordering that. I called it the fanaticism of ignorant people. I thought to myself, poor thing, he uses religion as a crutch because he lacks the character to walk straight. I felt a cold contempt, an intellectual superiority that made me feel almost divine. I was the law, he was chaos. Now, trapped in the mud of hell, my mouth sealed shut by the gold of my good deeds, I understood, Antonio was not chaos, Antonio was free, I was the prisoner. He knew who he was, a sinner who needed grace. I thought I was a goddess who deserved applause. He entered his cell singing praises, I entered eternity mute and stitched together. The truth descended upon me like a sledgehammer. I was not the judge of that infernal court, I was not there because of an administrative error, I was the defendant. And the crime was not robbery or murder, the crime was rejecting the only lawyer who never lost a case, simply because I thought I could defend myself. The devil realized I was remembering. He placed his hand, which now felt like a hot iron claw, on my throat. "Forget him." The creature screamed, and the ground trembled. "That human trash, that weakling, he's nothing. You are Dr. Maria Helena. You have dignity. Hell is the place for the worthy who don't accept handouts. Accept your fate with honor." He tightened his grip on my throat. I couldn't breathe, but the lack of air didn't matter anymore. I didn't need air for what I was about to do. I needed blood. I needed a soul. I tried to open my mouth. The golden wire pulled, cutting the flesh of my lips. I tasted the metallic taste of my own blood, trickling down my throat. The pain was excruciating, as if my face were being ripped in two. But I forced it, I forced my jaw against the devil's stitching. I no longer wanted to be perfect, I no longer wanted to be beautiful, I no longer wanted to be the respectable lady, I wanted to be like Antonio, I wanted to be like the thief on the cross, I wanted to be trash if it meant being cleaned by him. Inside my head, the final legal argument formed. It wasn't based on the penal code, it wasn't based on the Constitution, it was based on the highest law of the universe, the one I ignored for 76 years. I'm guilty. I screamed silently inside my chest, as the tears finally broke through the barrier of my pride and mingled with the blood on my face. I am guilty of everything. I am proud, I am vain, I am cold, I have no righteousness of my own, my embroidered towels are dirty rags. My toga is shame, I have nothing to offer in exchange for my soul, absolutely nothing. The demon's claw tightened, he brought his face close to mine and saw the real panic in those black eyes. Chalice roared him, "Don't you dare call the name burns, the name destroys my home, you have no right to that name, you spent your life ignoring it." He was right, I had no right, and it was exactly that which gave me courage. Salvation is not a right, it is a gift, and gifts are given to those who extend empty hands, not to those who have hands full of diplomas. With an effort that seemed to come from the roots of my existence, I tore the thread. It wasn't just a physical tear, It was a spiritual tear. I felt the gold of my vanity shatter. Blood gushed from my mouth, hot and real. Pain blinded me for a moment, but my mouth was free, not completely, but enough for the sound to come out, enough for the scream that had been trapped in my throat for a lifetime to explode. I didn't scream for help. I didn't scream, "Get me out of here." I didn't scream, "I promise to be good." That would be negotiating, and God doesn't negotiate. I screamed the only name that has authority over death, the only name that makes hell tremble, not out of fear of violence, but out of fear of holiness, Jesus. The sound came out hoarse, gurgling, mixed with crying and blood, but it was loud. It was the loudest sound I've ever produced in my entire life. It wasn't the polished voice of the judge, it was the roar of a wounded animal that had finally found its owner. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. I am a sinner. The reaction was immediate and violent. The demon holding me was thrown back, as if struck by an invisible shockwave. He screamed, a sharp sound of pure pain, covering his face with his claws, as if he had looked directly at the sun. The mud around me began to boil and dry. The darkness that seemed solid and eternal cracked. I kept screaming. I didn't stop. I knew that was my only chance. I clung to that name like a shipwrecked person clings to a plank in the middle of a stormy ocean. Lord Jesus, I am nothing. I am not righteous. I need your blood. Forgive me for my pride. Forgive me for thinking I didn't need you. Every time I pronounced the name of Jesus, the scenery around me suffered a spasm. The walls of darkness trembled. The golden threads that bound my arms and legs began to turn to ash and unravel. That place of condemnation, built on the cold logic of merit and guilt, could not withstand the invasion of grace. Grace is illogical to hell. Grace is a scandal. How can a woman who thought herself God be forgiven simply because she asked? The demon tried to rise, tried to lunge at me again, but he couldn't get close. There was a barrier around me. It wasn't a wall, it was a light, a weak, trembling light that emanated not from outside, but from within my chest, where repentance had finally been born. Stop! He screamed, writhing in the shadows. You belong here. The law demands your soul. The law was fulfilled on the cross. I answered, and for the first time, my voice had real authority, not the authority of a human robe, but the authority of a redeemed daughter. I am guilty, yes, but the penalty has already been paid, not by me, by him. I closed my eyes and curled up on the ground, waiting for the final blow, waiting to be torn to pieces for having defied the order of that place. But the blow didn't come. What came was a sound. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a explosion, it was a sound I hadn't heard since childhood. It was the sound of a strong wind, a gale that began high above, far above the infinite ceiling of darkness. The sound of something breaking the barrier between worlds. The sound of a rescue invasion. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. The sensation of falling returned, but this time I wasn't falling downwards, I was being pulled upwards. The mud tried to hold me back. The remnants of my old life tried to weigh down my ankles. The demon howled one last curse, promising I would never escape my own mind. But the name of Jesus was an unbreakable rope. I climbed through the darkness, through the cold, through the layers of silence and pain. The speed was dizzying. The air returned to my lungs, not like ground glass, but like liquid fire. My heart, that still and hardened heart, gave a violent beat in my physical chest, and then another, and another. Hell was left behind, a black spot swallowed by, from a distance, defeated not by my kindness, but by my absolute surrender. I ceased to be Judge Maria Helena. In that whirlwind of light and sound, I was just Maria, just a soul, and for the first time in 76 years, that was enough. The air entered my lungs not as a gentle breath of life, but as a sledgehammer blow to the chest. It was a necessary violence. My body, stretched out on the Persian carpet of the library, reacted with a brutal spasm, arching my back as if it had received a high-voltage electric shock. I didn't breathe. I swallowed the atmosphere. The oxygen burned my throat, scratching my trachea as if it were made of coarse sand. I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was not the infinite darkness of hell, but the white plaster with classic moldings of my house in Gramado. The lighting was dim, grey, the fog outside pressed against the glass windows, turning the world into a ghostly blur. I tried to move, but my limbs weighed tons. My left arm, the one that had fallen asleep before death, tingled painfully, as if thousands of needles were being driven into my skin. I turned my head to the side, smelling the dust and wax of furniture, the smell of my old life. Beside me on the floor was the embroidery. The white linen was stained by the tea I spilled when my heart stopped. The golden needle was still there, stuck in the fabric, shining innocently in the dim light. I looked at it and felt a chill that didn't come from the mountain heat. That needle wasn't innocent. That needle almost stitched my soul together for eternity. I don't know how long I lay there, crying, but it wasn't the restrained and elegant cry of Judge Maria Helena. It was a child's cry. The cry of someone who had just escaped a fire, covered in soot, wringing out the smoke of death. I cried from fear, yes, but mainly from gratitude. I was alive, my heart was beating, thump 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 thump. That sound, the rhythm I had always taken for granted, now seemed like the most beautiful music in the universe. It was the sound of mercy. I was found hours later by my housekeeper, who was puzzled. The silence in the house, I vaguely remember the sirens, the paramedics talking about miracles, vital signs, returning from nowhere. At the hospital, the doctors tried to explain the inexplicable with technical terms. They spoke of catalepsy, prolonged syncope, rare neurological phenomena. I just listened, shaking my head. They could call it whatever they wanted. I knew the truth. I hadn't fainted. I had been judged, condemned, and at the last second pardoned by an authority superior to mine. The physical recovery was slow. My heart was left with after-effects, an arrhythmia that reminds me with each uneven beat that my time here is borrowed, but the spiritual recovery was instantaneous and violent. As soon as I was discharged and returned home, the first thing I did was enter the library. That sanctuary of wood and leather that was once my pride now seemed like a mausoleum. I looked at the diplomas on the wall: Judge, Master of Legal Sciences, Honors. They were just pieces of paper, beautiful. They were papers the world respected, but I had seen the truth. In the court down there, those papers served only as fuel for the fire of vanity. I called the housekeeper and asked her to bring garbage bags. "Are you going to clean the books, Doña Maria?" she asked, surprised. "No," I replied. My voice was different, lower, hoarser. "I'm going to clean my life." I started with the togas, the black robes I wore for 40 years, the heavy fabric, symbol of my power to judge, went into the black bag. Then I went to the embroidery. I took all the altar cloths, all the robes I made with that superb perfectionism. I took the gold threads, the imported needles, the noble wood frames. I threw everything away. The housekeeper looked at me frightened, thinking the heart attack had affected my brain. "Doña Maria, this is worth a fortune. It's years of work." "It is." I cut without anger, only with certainty. "This is filthy rags. This is the rope with which I was hanging myself." I took everything to the backyard, where there was a burning area for dry leaves. The fog in Gramado was dense that afternoon. The cold cut my skin, but I didn't feel it. I lit the match. Seeing those clothes and those embroideries burn didn't bring me sadness, it brought liberation. As the smoke rose, grey and acrid, I felt the invisible threads that stitched my eyes and mouth shut being dissolved. I was no longer the judge, I was no longer the saint of the church. I was just an old woman, kneeling on the damp grass, thanking God for not giving me what I deserved. Today my routine is different. I no longer sit in the front pews of the church. I like to sit back there, near the door, where the latecomers, the ashamed, those who don't have Sunday clothes sit. I look at them and I no longer see riffraff. I see shipwreck companions. I see people who are often closer to heaven than I have been in my life because they know they need help. I talk to the people I used to ignore: the gardener, the cashier at the supermarket, the boy begging on the corner. I don't lecture them about the law. I talk about love. I talk about how dangerous it is to think we are good, and that's why I'm telling you this now. I know who my audience is. I know that may who are listening to this account are not criminals. You don't kill, you don't steal, you don't traffic, You are like I used to be, decent people, people who pay their bills on time, people who are proud of their honesty, people who look at the scandals on television and say, thank God, I'm not like that. I have an urgent message for you, the good citizen, the exemplary Christian, the intellectual. Hell isn't just for those who do blatant evil. Hell has a VIP wing reserved especially for those who trust in their own goodness. It's a clean, cold, and terrible place, where your pride will be your eternal torture. Lucifer doesn't just want you to sin, he wants you to feel righteous, he wants you to look in the mirror and love what you see, to the point of not needing Jesus. He wants you to trade the cross for your diploma, your tithe, your reputation. Don't fall into that trap. I fell, I went to the door of the abyss, holding my merits as if they were gold, and discovered they were just dust. The only thing that saved me wasn't my position as a judge, it was the moment I became the defendant, it was the moment I gave up defending myself and cried out to the only lawyer who can overturn the death sentence. Don't wait for your heart to stop to discover the truth. The court is in session now, at this very moment, while you listen to me, and the question the great judge asks isn't how good you were, the question is, who paid your debt? If you think you can pay alone with your good works, with your morality, and I weep for you, because the debt is unpayable, but if you have the courage to humble yourself, to tear the seam of your vanity and say, I am nothing, he is everything, then, hope. I am Maria Helena, I was a judge on earth, I was condemned in hell and I was absolved by grace, and today, sitting on this cold balcony, waiting for the day he will call me for good, I only have one certainty, my justice is a dirty rag, but his blood, his blood is the only law that matters. May God have mercy on our goodness.